Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Room 42. I'm Liz Fraley from Single Sourcing Solutions. I'm the moderator. This is Janice Summers from TC Camp. She's our interviewer, and welcome to Dr. Dawn Armfield, today's guest in Room 42. Dawn Armfield, PhD, is an Associate Professor of Technical Communication in the Department of English, where she teaches usability, user experience, research methods, visual communication and technical communication, and instructional design, travel writing, and prototyping. She's amazing. Her research focus is on human-centered design in emerging, immersive, and embodied technologies with a focus on empathy and ethics. She's published in interdisciplinary fields with an emphasis in emerging technologies, visual communication, online collaboration, and educational technology. Her most recent publication is a co-authored chapter, Human-Centered Content Design in Augmented Reality. Prior to becoming a professor, she is an instructional technologist, assistant analyst, a project manager, and a web content developer. And today she's here to help us start answering the question, how do ethics and empathy create better communication? Welcome.
Thank you.
We are thrilled to have you here with us today. So one of the things I want to kind of kick things off with is talk about the shift from user to human. When did that shift start to happen? Because I was thinking about that and I thought, she's right. We have started to shift, I think.
Yeah. Well, I know in education, there was, I would say maybe about 8 or 9 years ago, I had some colleagues who were talking about user experience and experience architecture and things like that, and they were avoiding that. And at that same time, I was reading documents from people who were actually out in the field saying, user can be one of those terms that people start to think about in derogatory ways, and it has negative connotations because of drug use and all of these other things. So and it also dehumanizes the people that we're actually creating things for, right? So there was this shift around probably about a decade ago, I would say.
And it's really interesting that you're bringing all these things up because words have meaning. I know that sounds ironic, but words have meaning, and with them, there's a lot of other meanings culturally that affect us.
Yeah.
So that word user means more than just that. And it's also, it is a detached word, isn't it?
Right. Well, and, and user, that it could be a negative connotation in terms of relationships. That person's a user, right?
Right.
So if we want to be better communicators, then we need to think about the people at the other end of whatever it is that we're creating as humans rather than just using this stuff that we're doing. And I think that's where the empathy and the ethics come in, right? Because we're trying to think about them as people, not just as somebody who's doing a function or creating something from whatever it is that we've developed.
Yeah, like somebody's here just to use and move along.
Right. If we want them to engage with whatever it is that we're making or that we're sharing, then we have to think about them in a better light.
Right. I know I was listening to interview with John Carroll that was done not too long ago, and he was saying they're learners. Right.
Yeah.
Right. That was the word that he was using. So that shift into humans. Now let's talk about empathy and ethics. Now you fold this into your teaching.
Yes.
Tell me more about that. How do you teach empathy? That's a tough one.
It really is. So, I was actually thinking about this morning as I was getting ready to come here, and I was thinking about when did I start doing this? And it's when I would say, let's see, I was in another position, and I was at a conference in Ireland, and I was wearing wearable technology because we were presenting on wearable tech. And the wearable tech that I was wearing was actually a camera that took snapshots.
Uh-huh.
And it was pretty innovative at the time. So that tells you about how long ago this was. It was probably 8 or 9 years ago. And so it's taking continuous photographs while I'm at lunch, but I'm at lunch with people that I've known since grad school. Some of them were my professors in grad school. And all of a sudden, the conversation stops, and one of my former professors turns to me and says, "That does not take audio, does it?" And I said, "No, why?" And she said, "Because I don't want what we're saying here to be recorded and shared back." And I started thinking about that in terms of the technologies that I was testing to talk about, to share about, and saying, we do all of these things, we test all of these things, but are we thinking about who it is that we are testing with and the participants that may or may not know the full extent of whatever it is that we're testing?
Mm-hmm.
And they all knew that I was wearing wearable tech, and they knew what it was. They knew for the most part what it was doing, that it was taking pictures. They just didn't know that it didn't take audio as well. And I started just really thinking about that. So I came back to my classroom and I said, let's talk about this, because this is really important. When we're doing usability testing, are we thinking about how the people that are participants, how they feel at that moment, or how they are responding to this in a visceral way? Are we thinking about them in terms of being human? And are we thinking about that they might come into this situation scared or nervous or tired, or they've been forced into it because their mom said this is a good thing for you to do, or whatever, right? Or they're a classmate and they feel like this is the way that they will get a good grade. Whatever it is,
Right.
there are these outside factors that can affect them. So I want you to start to put yourself in their place and think, how can I make this situation better for them? And I extend that past my usability and my UX classes. And I think in visual technical communication, we start off with this whole cultural identity section, because and everybody has to, what we do is we all share a piece of our culture, because I want us all to, number one, we're all in this class together, so we have a classroom culture, but everybody is coming to the class from a different space. So I want us all to be appreciative of culture and the differences that make that, and why a classmate might respond in this way or that way to something that you post visually, right? So it can take many forms when I'm doing it, but really it's about understanding others that we are working with, or that we are working around, or just people.
So that empathy is saying, look beyond just the user of this technology for the technology's functions,
right?
But the person as a whole, human,
right?
With all of the information that they have. It's more than just. It was funny, I was teaching a class just the other day, and we look at beyond demographics, right? Because we all have the typical demographics, but that doesn't describe the human.
Yeah.
Right? What is their life like? Like, you can say, well, this is a worker, but what are they like their whole life?
Right.
Their hobbies, their interests, their social life, what drives and motivates them? Because that influences our interaction with technology, right?
Does. And I think, even when in my UX class, when students have to create personas, one of the things that I ask them to do is get deep into this person. Who are they really? Not just what are their demographics? Who are they? Why would they respond to this site in this way? Understand them, because that's important. It's easy to just do cursory usability testing, or think about our audience as just this faceless mass out here who is reading or doing something, but they're more than that. And once we understand them, then we can actually create better materials for them in different ways that will reach them where they're at, because really it's about them. It's not about us.
Right. Yeah, because the technology ideally is there to create some solution for them,
Right.
right? But why are they there? But I like the fact that you're looking beyond just the surface and you're asking why, what are their motivations?
Yeah.
More than just, what they're trying to do. So let's talk about the other side, the ethics side.
Yeah. So the ethics actually came in my first year at this position. I was talking about empathy, and I was teaching an emerging technologies, ethics in emerging technologies class. It was a special topics class, and I was really excited about it. And we were talking about drones, and we were talking about AI, and we were talking about, immersive technologies. But then one of the conversations turned to, how do we make sure that drones are used responsibly? How do we make sure that AI is used responsibly, right? And so then we started talking about all of the laws that govern technologies or don't govern technologies, as the case may be, because there's a lot that's left to chance, as we've seen in the last year with a lot of the court cases and whatnot. Yeah. And my students started saying, well, we need to have lay people on these governing boards or these spaces so that they can say how real people feel about these things. And I said, well, isn't that why we elect our elected officials? Aren't they supposed to be? Yeah, but they're in people's pockets. And so then I said, okay, so let's start thinking about the ethical implications about where the money is, how we're talking about technologies, how we're sharing information about technologies, how we're writing the documentation for technologies, all of this. Where are those ethics? And, anybody who's taken technical communication, especially, I don't, in my area, I know we came up against the Challenger memo time and time again about how was it ethical that it wasn't read properly, or was it ethical that it was, so that the whole memo about the O-rings and the Challenger is brought up over and over again to talk about ethics, but ethics goes deeper. And so one of the things that I've been doing is I pull up documentation that talks about these kind of guidelines to go through to think about, is what I'm creating ethical? Does it do any harm? Does it give people space to think about things in different kinds of ways? Is it allowing them to be ethical themselves? Is it asking them to do something that might be illegal? Is it, so every step of whatever it is that they're creating, are they thinking about how the audience may perceive it and may use whatever they're creating to do something that might not be proper? So and the way that I bring this up to my students is, we hear this all the time with social media. I was one of the first, I think, 100,000 people on Twitter. And back in that day, Twitter was not what it is today. And it was more of what the originators thought it should be, right? These different kinds of communication. And you hear this conversation all the time. Well, it's not supposed to be used this way, or it's not supposed to be used this way, or Facebook isn't supposed to be used this way. And we talk about all kinds of, iPhones aren't supposed to be used this way, but we can use it this way. Who is the arbiter of how it should be used? Right? So if we're thinking ethically, if we're creating these things, or if we're creating the documentation for these, or if we're creating spaces for these, because I do immersive experiences, are we creating them and thinking about the ethics that could be involved? If you might use it this way as the tester, but how might our audience think about using it, and is it going to be ethical? So that's where it all came from. It came from these long conversations with students, because they're brilliant and they bring things out in me.
Well, they think outside, because I think we kind of get set in our patterns. So if you want, your patterns shaken up, talk to a bunch of college students.
Exactly.
Because they'll get right outside of that box. They haven't been boxed in so much.
Yes.
And it's interesting because, when you create things and you have a code of ethic and then somebody goes out and uses them in unethical ways.
Yes. So this week, my usability class was actually doing the ethical module, and we went over the UXPA ethic code of conduct or ethics that they have, and we went over I'm trying to think. Usability Geek had a page about ethics. There are a few good links about ethics out there. And so we went over all of them and we said, okay, so how realistic is it to be able to do this in every single usability test that you're going to do? Can you think about this ethical approach, right? And they're like, well, yeah, because it's pretty common sense. And I said, it is common sense. And yeah, I'll share those with you, Liz.
I got
and they are pretty common sense, but are you thinking about them when you're writing your questions for your testing? Are you thinking about them as you're setting up the environment for your testing? Are you thinking about them as you're collecting the data and writing the data for your final audience?
Well, and it's interesting. I would say that there's nothing common about common sense, right?
True.
And I think you're bringing up some good points as far as, well, maybe you need to have a list of ethic thought provokers as you're writing to help you think in ethical terms that is not so common, right? I mean, something that triggers you.
Glad it wasn't me.
Something that triggers you to think consciously about that. What are your thoughts about that?
And I think that's really important. And students, so the interesting thing is a lot of my students are actually in computer science because those are the students I get the most. My undergraduate students are in computer science. My graduate students, and we have combined classes, so they're undergraduate, graduate, at least in this class. And my graduate students are Tech Comm master students, right? So I have them work in teams, but the undergraduates will always say, I'm not getting this approach in computer science. And I said, but you should be, because you are creating things that are going to affect people. So maybe that's my job as the person in the humanities. I'm bringing the humans back into whatever it is that you're doing.
Right, back into the science, the humans who are going to be interacting. So, and it's, when you go out into the commercial world, right, companies have ethical codes. I think, tech writers have ethical codes. So there's a lot of different ethical codes out there.
Yeah.
How would you make sure that you're adhering to a higher ethical standard? Would you combine these and create your own code of ethics as you're working to help guide you?
That's a really good point. And I think that, if you're working for a company, of course, you're going to use theirs, right? Because that's your higher authority at that point.
But what if theirs are silent?
And there's ethics for your discipline and your industry is also.
Yeah, right. And I think that there are organizations, so like, SCT or STC, sorry. I don't know why I said
we
SCT.
Understood what you said.
AMLA, the American Medical Writers, has a really comprehensive set of ethics for sure.
Where I actually started looking up codes of ethics is I belong to the Association of Internet Researchers, and early on, they were creating code of conduct for the research that we were doing on the internet. And we were starting to think about that and to think about the ways that we do research with people who may not ever see us, right? But we're studying them, but they may never even know that we're studying them because everything they're doing is out in the public. How can I be ethical about that? And how can I ethically approach that research
Mhm.
Because IRBs at
Yeah.
at the time didn't really know how to deal with that either. Right? They're getting better, but still, in immersive technologies, they have no idea what kinds of things might go on in
Yeah.
those, and sometimes it's kind of creepy, and sometimes it's really cool. So
Yeah.
Mhm.
yeah, but I think if you're trying to be an ethical technical communicator, there are many ways to do so, and if you want some governing rules to follow, I thought UXPAs are some of the best out there. um, and yeah, I think theirs are some of the best, and I think because they're just so clear, and they're really geared towards the kinds of work that we do.
Okay.
Oh,
So what do you do? This is just a thought thing. What do you do? So say I'm a writer, I'm working out in the field, company has a code of ethics. I have a code of ethics as a professional writer. And I've, incorporated, some of the better ethics in my way of operating. What do you do if you run into something where where it crosses that line, where what you're being asked to do may feel like it crosses that line?
So this is something I actually talk to my students all the time about, because I say, we're kind of living in an idealized world in a classroom.
Oh, it's
I can
nice, right?
say, right, I can say you need to be ethical, but we get
Right.
out into the workplace and those lines are a lot more gray or blurred than they are in the classroom.
And
So,
what you're working on,
right, exactly.
that has an impact, right?
Yeah, well, I've had some students go to work for the industrial military complex, right? So they're working in spaces that could be iffy, um, depending on your perspective. And so what I say to them is, you need to think about the context. You
Mhm.
need to think about who you're creating this for. Is it ethical to that audience? If you're feeling like it's crossing a line, then you talk to your supervisor. If you're not getting any feedback from them, or if they're just, blowing it off, whatever, you have to decide, is this a
yeah.
point where I become a whistleblower or not, right? Is this the point where it could actually cause damage or people could be hurt? Because, I joke around with my students and I say that technical communication is not brain surgery. It's not life or death, but it can be,
It can
because some
be.
of the things that we create
Yes.
can be. So
Yeah.
we have to think very carefully about what it is that we're creating. And if it has the ability to do harm or to create chaos or whatever, however it might cross some of those ethical lines, then you need to make a decision about it, and to think about, to always keep in mind those people at the other end. How will this affect them? Because that's where that empathy comes back into play with the ethics, right? How can my decisions right at this point make a difference in their lives?
Mm-hmm. And I think it's that, I think that one of the really good litmuses is, will it cause harm? Does it have a potential to cause harm?
Yeah.
And I think in that situation, there's a higher authority called the law. And a lot of times these companies will have legal departments that, if it's that egregious, that might be a good path to pursue. What are the potential liabilities to the company?
Right. Well, and if
Which
you approach
might
it,
help them, and it might help them like wake up to something when you're exposing a potential liability.
yes,
Yeah.
definitely. If you approach it from that perspective, or an economic loss, then they might be more willing to see it as something that needs to be addressed right away.
Right. Right.
Because who
Interesting.
cares about those humans? It's about the
Those
money.
humans.
Yeah.
But it's great.
It's
I mean, it's important that we bring that all back into perspective. Now, how is with all of the artificial intelligence now? How is that with empathy for humans? Like, there's a lot of gray area, I think, in the artificial intelligence, isn't there?
Definitely. So when I'm thinking about AI,
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking about, is it this small thing? Do my lights turn on automatically for me so that I'm heading into a lit apartment rather than a dark apartment so I feel safer? That's a small thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's automated, and it's not really an extensive AI. But there's now, my Pixel phone, which is designed by Google, which has amazing AI, can answer my phone for me and tell the person on the other end that they are checking the call to make sure that they are a valid person, and to let them know what they are calling about. Or it can call and make reservations for me, or it can,
I never knew my phone could do that.
Yes. So when I start to think about those, I think, does the person on the other end know that they are not talking to me, but that they are talking to artificial intelligence? And if they did know, how would that make them feel? Or do I use it or do I not use it? Is it a thing of convenience for me, but a thing that could be really creepy for them? Or, they might start wondering, is my voice being recorded? Do they now have my voice on in their files, right? So am I thinking about how this might affect that person that I'm using the AI with? And AI can be, that's just a really small thing that they're looking at AI for, that we can use AI for in everyday life. But
And yet look how reaching it is.
Right. And I think that it's up to us as those people who might be employing it or deploying it to think about who is on that other end. And that's not even necessarily technical communication. That's just human interaction and thinking about the ways that we're interacting with our fellow human beings out there in the world and what they may or may not want.
Right, because that's taking like that human to the nth degree, because you've got, you're communicating to a human who's using the Pixel phone, right? And trying to decide, do I turn this feature on or off? What does the feature mean? And that human is going to affect other humans with that decision that they make. So it has, it's like two deep in or three deep in that you're thinking about that human factor.
Right. And it can snowball, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because how many layers will it go through to reach? I mean, that's not to say that when I'm pretty sure that I'm getting a spam call that I don't use the screening, because I do. Because they're using automated services themselves.
Automated, right? Automated dialers with,
That's right. So
voices. Yeah.
So we have AI speaking to AI or whatever.
Now we're really writing for the machines.
Right. Well, and machine learning these days is just creating amazingly human-like responses.
Mm-hmm.
But we need to think about those kinds of things. We need to think about those kinds of connections and the ways that they are reaching the people on the other end. I like that 90% of the emails are written by Gmail, and I totally feel that. My text messages are often written by whatever's popping up in the prediction, because Google knows me so well. I tell people I'm pretty much owned by Google and Amazon at this point. They know everything about me. So
they suckered me in for convenience and comfort.
That's right.
I sold my soul.
And I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
Thing. I mean, really, because honestly, when you think about it, there's so much that automation helps us with in our daily lives, and you know, it really does help us do better and be better.
Yeah.
On its highest level, it's, you know, it's this other side, and I think it's important what you're talking about is that we need to consider all of these things, right? So maybe we need to find a way to communicate to that person who's deciding, you know, do you want Google to rule your world or not? You know, here is the pros and here's the cons. Maybe if we confront them with choices and potential, the risk and reward, so that they can weigh the decision for themselves, because ethics are colored and influenced by the individual as well, because we all have a driving compass in us as individual humans.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and I think that that's the important thing, is to think about, I might not want to use that that service that allows me to make reservations because I want to think about the person on the other end. Would it be convenient? Sure. But I also don't live in a big city and don't have to make too many reservations, right? So it might not impact me as much as it might impact somebody who lives in LA or San Francisco or New York City, because everything is done with reservations. And in those places, the people on the other end might be used to it. They might be well aware that that's what is happening in any case. So I think that it does come down to an individual responsibility to, you know, there's a lot of this kind of a conversation going on out there right now. How do our individual responsibilities affect the greater good, or how do we affect one another? And I'm trying to talk to my students about this all the time, that every little decision that you make in technical communication can affect thousands of others. Every little choice that you make, word choice, can affect however many other people will be at the other end of whatever it is that you're creating. Or, you know, my computer science students who are developing things and they're thinking about the word choices in whatever it is that they're developing. I ask them to take responsibility and to care for the people at the other end, because if we're not doing it, then who will?
Right. That's true, because oftentimes the you know, creators of technology are so wrapped up in that creation of that they don't step away and think about it. And I think as writers, they're trained from the beginning to think outside of that, not just think about the features and the functions of whatever technology you're developing, but the human on the other end. Thank goodness we've transitioned from user to human on the other end, right?
Yeah. And I think it makes us better people when we're connected. You know, we talk about these ways that we're in these online spaces and we don't necessarily, and we have an entire generation who's growing up not feeling super connected. But if you start to connect yourself in those kinds of ways, and you start to think about anybody else, you know, when we first started on the internet early on, when the chat rooms were going on and people would be like, it's just another person on the other end of, you know, whatever. It might not even be a person. It could be a bot, whatever. But the whole thing was, you have to think about the people at the other end of that chat conversation. It's an actual person. There's a real person. And we've been doing this ever since the internet came around, to think about the people at the other end. Technical communication is no different than that. We are thinking about the audience at the other end all of the time. And if we think about them as human beings, as the people that might surround us, you know, our families, our friends, if we think about how they might use this, whatever it is that we're creating, I think it just makes us better people because we are creating a space that is more human friendly and human facing, right? Thinking about the ways that it's focused on the humanity of it and not necessarily the technology of it. How is it helping the human rather than elevating the technology? And now I'm going to get all philosophical.
Yeah, well, it's been a really good conversation because you've got me thinking about the word suggestions, right? In email, the word suggestions, they've got it in Google Docs now, word suggestions on my iPhone, right? Where they fit what the next word should be. And then I was thinking about Microsoft's bot that went horribly, horribly wrong.
Yeah.
Right. So those suggested words I'm going to start watching and paying attention to those now because I'm curious. What direction do they go?
Well, I don't know if you've noticed this, but on Facebook these days, I post on Facebook once a day. I post a picture, but
I know about them.
thank you. But Facebook now has suggested responses to posts, and
really,
Wow.
yes, not just emoticons or emojis or the specialized emoji, but they actually have worded suggestions now. And I looked at them and I was like,
I noticed that little ribbon now that you bring it up? Yeah.
Yes. How is this impacting our actual conversation with one another?
Yes. Oh my goodness. Yes. And I think I saw it in LinkedIn too.
I was thinking more of there's all kinds of issues about communication on Facebook and the sort of funneling of people to specific ideas. And I wonder how that will play into it.
Definitely.
Right. What are the suggested comments going to be? Are they going to differ between groups, between people, between kinds of people? Like what? And I don't know that any independent researcher can see that because it's all tuned.
Well, I was actually wondering that. I was wondering if my suggested responses would be different from, say, my brother, right? And because he and I do research together, I thought, this might be a fun place to do some research and to think about those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Because those algorithms, how are they
deciding what to say?
Yeah. And it
what
sounds,
I think.
Well, and the thing is that it sounds a lot like me. And so then I think, what are they doing? Do they know how I respond to people? And
it makes you want to create some false personas to see how it tunes.
How it tunes to different personas. Yeah. That would be interesting. Right. And it's funny that you bring that because I noticed the other day I was sending out an email and I use Gmail. And it was like finishing my sentence. And I'd look up and it start finishing my sentence. I'm like, no, that's taking it in the wrong direction. Those aren't the words that I would choose for this particular sentence. Yeah. Good choice, but not the ones I want for right now. Yeah. And I thought, wow, what if I just automatically went along? It's guiding my whole conversation. Basically, yes. When it's deciding what I'm going to say, it guides my entire conversation so that I lose my voice.
Yeah.
But on the flip side of that, boy, is it handy to have an automatic response. I can just send it off for the times where I don't have time to really think.
But then I start to question, okay, is it the system that has agency or do I have agency here? And yes, I get to choose those, but we've seen autocorrect do all kinds of crazy things, right?
Yeah.
And so when those kinds of things, and Jessica brings this up where the suggestions can work because it's focused to a specific situation. But then I start to think, well, what if that specific situation is set up in this way, but that wouldn't be my response to that situation in this particular case because content matters. And the context of that situation matters. And understanding the nuances of the situation matter, right?
Yes.
That's where we are actually experts. That's the kinds of
Yes.
stuff that we think about.
Yes. Context rules,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right? Because
Really good.
it's so frustrating when people lift things out of context and then misuse and misinform, even with the best intentions.
And don't
But-
you think that the bots can do that? I mean,
yes.
because they are pulling out suggestions based on what they think that you're going to say, and you might just click and not realize that it actually added that to your
Yeah.
conversation or to your response, right?
Yeah.
So it requires those of us who think about the context of a situation to really pay attention to that kind of thing at all times, and not to let the suggestions have the agency over our knowledge of the context.
Yeah. Some cool research coming along from there. I can see it.
I think that these are really, there was a comment earlier in here about how hire young white guys to do these things and it will focus something on a different way. But there's some truth to this. We hire different kinds of people, or we hire homogenous groups of people, and they're not thinking about how a woman might respond to this one area, or a person of color might respond to this kind of a thing in a totally different way than that person who designed it, who created the algorithm might. So we need to really think about these things and go deeper when we're thinking about, why am I making this choice? Is it because it is easy and it gets me through that email quicker? Or is it because that actually was the word choice that I wanted to do? They can spark your thought process. Definitely.
Mhm.
Yeah. I don't know what the original intended purpose was, but I do think, but we've had these automated responses since, Clippy was doing a lot of that for us.
Yes. Everybody remembers Clippy.
I think that
So there's-
Clippy's falling out of a certain age group.
But obviously people will respond to Clippy. But really, if we think back to Clippy was that precursor to all of this.
Right. And it just keeps getting, Clippy just gets more sophisticated as the artificial intelligence starts to grow more.
Clippy's back. Oh no.
All hail Clippy.
Yeah.
What are Clippy's potentials for empathy and for ethics? Right.
Well, you get that smiley face and you can't help but feel good. I don't, or frustrated. It's one or the other.
Wow.
Right. It was all in the googly eyes. Right. So some people, Clippy made me mad, right? That's right. Because it would be frustrating. You would say, no, I want this to happen. But Clippy would say, no, you really want this to happen. Is that what the auto suggestions are doing to us? They're telling us, no, you really want to write in this way.
Right. They're trying to rule us. Well, it's like those automated chat bots.
It's the rise of the machine. We should just throw it in now. The rise of the machine, and all of those sci-fi movies are going. Terminator's coming. That's all there is to it.
We just have to make sure that we program ethics into them so that they stop and think too, right?
Right.
Before the machines start to rule, like how do you make sure they understand ethics and empathy?
Well, how would you program empathy into AI? Yeah.
Well, that's why I started out, because teaching empathy is hard. To teach empathy to humans, from a psychology perspective, there are psychologists who may argue it is impossible to teach empathy.
So one of the things that I do to get back to that is I come back all the time, and my students might create something. I'll say, okay, that is not affecting me in quite the way I think that you think that it should be. This is how I feel when I read this, or when I view this, or when I'm immersed in this. This is how it's making me feel. Is that what you meant to do? Right? Or ask your testers or the participants in your usability testing, how are they feeling in this? Because that matters.
How do you feel?
And that's how I think that we start to teach empathy, is to start to care about those other people on the other end.
Should be a question. How do you feel? Right.
I'm bringing it back to that one-to-one person, complex individual to complex individual.
Yeah.
And you can practice.
Yeah, exactly. And I see that as my role. I see that as my role to influence good human beings in the end. I can teach them everything I know about technical communication, but really in the end, what I tell them is, this isn't really a writing class, or it's not really a communication class. It's really about being a good human class. And how can we take that forth into the world? And that might seem all, wishy-washy to STEM people, but my STEM students respond to it really well. And I think a part of that is because they're not getting it anywhere else.
Well, and everybody who creates something wants it to be used and wants it to be appreciated. They want their creations to be appreciated and used properly. So from that perspective, I think they do care.
Yeah.
Right. I can't, our time is up. I could go on and on.
Yeah.
There's so many other.
I keep trying to stop it, and I'm like, I don't want to.
I know, right? I cannot believe my time is up already, but I'm getting that like red flashy thing. I have so enjoyed this conversation, and there's so much here for people. I hope we've communicated some techniques that some practitioners can implement in their practical lives. And I'm so thrilled that you're teaching from the perspective before they get out into the working world. Let's implant this desire to be empathetic and ethical from the very first out of the gate. And that makes us all better.
Yeah.
Thank
you so much for being here.
Yes, thank you so much for your time. Thank you. And thanks everybody for attending, and we'll see you the next time.
Bye.